Welcome to our channel. We're so happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe and help us hit our goal of 100,000 subscribers. South African police beating women with batons in Durban, South Africa, on April 17, 1962, after they had destroyed and set fire to a brewery in protest against police actions banning homemade alcohol. Mishilat Madhavan from Mahe may be the only Indian ever to be executed by the Nazis. CBS's Face the Nation has had many politicians and world leaders appear on the program since it debuted in 1954. But you might not know that Che Guevara was among them. In December 1964, Guevara appeared on the program while in New York. This is a photo of him taken on the show. A photo of Gabriel Fluffy Iglesias, who nearly 100 years later, in March of 2025, is the most recent celebrity to put their hands and signature in cement in front of the Chinese theater. Before she was Dorothy on The Golden Girls, Bea Arthur joined the U.S. Marine Corps Women's Reserve during World War II. She served for 2 years as a driver and dispatcher in North Carolina and had only one blemish on her record: contracting a venereal disease that left her incapacitated for a month in 1944. This is the first photo of the very first broadcast of a human face transmitted on television. The photo was taken when John Logie Baird gave the world's first public demonstration of television at his laboratory in London. Dzerzhinsky Felix Edmundowicz, Polish revolutionary, Soviet statesman and party leader, head of a number of people's commissariats, founder and head of the Cheka. The photo was taken in Krakow in 1912. In 1911, Italian handyman Vincenzo Peruggia stole the Mona Lisa from the Louvre by hiding in a supply closet overnight and walking out with the painting under his coat. Motivated by a sense of patriotism, he believed the artwork belonged in Italy, not France. The painting was missing for 2 years before Peruggia was caught trying to sell it to an art dealer in Florence. Here's a photo of it being inspected by the Uffizi Museum's director, Giovanni Poggi, after it was recovered. Dewey defeats Truman is one of the most iconic photos in American history. As you can see, the photo shows President Truman triumphantly holding up a premature Chicago Daily Tribune headline, incorrectly declaring his opponent, Thomas Dewey, the winner of the 1948 U.S. presidential election. There were still Civil War veterans alive during Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration. In fact, in 1938, Roosevelt met with them at a ceremony commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, as seen in the photo below, at which he gave a speech to dedicate the Eternal Light Peace Memorial. The ceremony was also captured on film and shown on newsreels in movie theaters. Baseball legends Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig fundraising for a new hospital at Dexter Park in Brooklyn, New York, on October 12, 1928. Ruth subsequently commandeered a cop's horse and proceeded to ride around the stadium. Rick Moranis married costume designer Ann Belsky in 1986, and together they had 2 children. Then tragedy struck, and Moranis decided to take a break from acting in 1997 to raise his children. When asked about his decision, he said, "I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever. My life is wonderful." Marilyn Monroe graced the cover of the very first issue of Playboy magazine in December 1953. However, she didn't pose for the magazine. The iconic issue featured a nude photo of Monroe, taken years earlier in 1949, which Hugh Hefner purchased for $500 without her direct involvement. Despite the controversy, the issue was an instant hit, selling over 50,000 copies and further cementing Monroe's place in pop culture history. Mohandas Gandhi, with his charkha cloth spinning wheel in his prison cell at Yaravda prison in India from 1932 to 1933, he was imprisoned for demonstrating against British rule. He encouraged others to spin their own cloth, as opposed to buying it off the British. No photos of the Titanic's grand staircase exist, well, at least before it sank. The photos we see of the grand staircase are actually from the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, which had an identical staircase. The two ships were built side by side and were nearly identical. At the turn of the 20th century, tens of thousands of children worked as newsboys in cities across the United States. They would buy bundles of newspapers from publishers and then sell them on the street. Most newsboys were poor, many were homeless, and some began working as young as 4 years old. Marilyn Monroe graced the cover of the very first issue of Playboy magazine in December 1953. However, she didn't pose for the magazine. The iconic issue featured a nude photo of Monroe, taken years earlier in 1949, which Hugh Hefner purchased for $500 without her direct involvement. Despite the controversy, the issue was an instant hit, selling over 50,000 copies and further cementing Monroe's place in pop culture history. The iconic Hollywood sign was actually built in 1923 to advertise the Hollywoodland real estate development in the hills below it. The sign was originally only supposed to be up for 18 months, but it became a visual symbol of Los Angeles. Throughout most of the golden age of Hollywood, the Hollywood sign read Hollywoodland, with the land part only being removed in 1949. No, this is not a photo of Betty White in the 1940s. This is actually Betty dressed up in 40s clothes to promote her hosting the 75th annual Tournament of Roses parade, which was in 1964. As part of the promotion, Betty dressed up in different eras during which the parade was held. Bar Gunner. Terry Moore eats his rations on Okinawa. April/May 1945. He served with the 184th Infantry Regiment, 7th Infantry Division, and was wounded in action on May 27, 1945. He was discharged on August 9, 1945, and passed away in 2004. He is buried in Lompoc, California. 3 friends at a tiki bar while on a hockey road trip to Montreal around 68 to 70. 2 were sports journalists, the other a hockey team employee. Photos was taken by an employee of the bar and sold to the customers. These 3 were the best of friends. These guys were definitely old school cool. A photo of the Isleworth Mona Lisa, which some people believe is an earlier version of Leonardo da Vinci's famous Mona Lisa. It features a younger-looking woman with a similar pose and smile. However, its authenticity and origin has been the subject of debate. While some experts argue Leonardo himself painted it, others believe it could be the work of a follower. These photos, taken in 1946, are the first photos of Earth taken from space. They were able to achieve this by launching a V-2 missile carrying a 35mm motion picture camera into space. The camera was protected in a steel case, which allowed it to survive when the missile crashed back down to Earth. On this day in 1970, 2,000 students gathered on the campus of Kent State in Ohio to protest the Vietnam War. Though canisters of tear gas were fired into the crowd, the protesters remained steadfast. At 12:24 p.m., National Guardsmen opened fire, killing 4 people and injuring 9 in 13 seconds. This is a picture of a meeting of the New York chapter of the Fat Men's Club, circa 1930. According to the photo's caption, pictured here are a Rockwitz, 312 pounds, comedian Eddie Carvey, 250 pounds, David Burns, 475 pounds, and F.C. Cupper, 351 pounds. Members had to be at least 200 pounds to join. A lone Soviet soldier walks away from a grave of his fallen brothers in arms on the banks of the Volga, Stalingrad. 478,000 to 675,000 Red Army troops died in the brutal fighting. February 1943. The Palace of Fine Arts that stands today in San Francisco was actually built in the 60s. It was originally built for the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition to showcase art and celebrate the city's recovery from the 1906 earthquake. However, it was only meant to be a temporary structure, made of plaster and wood that deteriorated over time. By the 1960s, it had to be completely torn down and rebuilt with steel and concrete to preserve it. One of the biggest fads of the 1950s was phone booth stuffing, wherein a bunch of people would, well, stuff themselves into a phone booth. The world record at the time was 25 people stuffed into a phone booth, truly an example of the triumph of the human spirit.